Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Charli XCX, titled Sucker. There are a lot of pop acts that I wish I liked a lot more than I do. Acts that might be very popular or get a ton of critical acclaim, and yet for many reasons just don't connect with me or click with me whatsoever. Because even though I'm a critic who likes all sorts of offbeat, weird stuff, I also cover the pop charts. And since there's nothing wrong with liking pop music in principle, I just wish that more of it managed to really connect with me, that's all. Now in that category, Charli XCX is one of those artists, and how much I've liked or appreciated her music is really all over the map. I love it. Her feature on the smash hit from Icona Pop, it was one of my favorite hit songs from 2013. But having re-listened to her last album, True Romance, since I reviewed it in text, I'm sorry, it still doesn't really grip me all that much. The heavy, fuzz-saturated beats, the gothic textures that recall a lot of Darkwave's heaviness without a lot of the killer melodies, the lyrics that were sketched so broadly to be borderline insubstantial, and Charli XCX herself not presenting a consistent or all that likable persona, I'm sorry, these elements, they just did not come together for me. True Romance was trying to play itself as portentous and serious, but the writing or performances were rarely strong enough to hold up on their own, and I was just left feeling really disappointed every single time I tried to re-listen through that album. So with all that in mind, I had a certain amount of real trepidation in approaching her newest record, Sucker, cited as a massive change in genre and focus to more of a pop rock sound. And while it was indeed interesting in theory, I haven't exactly been wild about either of her two biggest performances this year. Her solo on Fancy with Iggy Azalea, or her solo hit tied to The Fault in Our Stars titled Boom Clap. It's not like these songs are bad, just lacking in real distinctive flavor to really grip me. So I wasn't sure what I was going to be getting with this album. But since this record has been getting rather shocking amounts of critical acclaim, I figured, okay, what the hell, and I dove straight into it. What'd I find? Well, it's better than True Romance, I can say that. But the more I've listened through this album, the more I've realized that Sucker and indeed Charli XCX just isn't to my taste as an artist. I'm not saying she makes bad music, because there are songs on this album that I do like, but that her overall approach to sound and lyrics just doesn't work all that well for me, even though I get why it might work for others. And yet, in a strange way, I get the niggling feeling that I should like Sucker by Charli XCX a fair bit more than I do, because it took the exact same path that Kesha took with Warrior in a shift towards more of a rock direction, and yet I can't quite say it's nearly as good. So okay, let's start with what Sucker does right. And really, the biggest part would be the major shift in sound from the darker, more atmospheric instrumentation, something a little bit rougher and more lean. This is bratty, in-your-face pop rock, pure and simple. And while I do think Charli XCX doesn't quite have enough of a raw edge and a punk style to be really gripping me as a pop rock singer, it is a better fit for her broader delivery. Hell, if we're looking for words to describe this album, broad would be the biggest one leaping to mind. This album operates in very broad strokes, loud stomping choruses, exaggerated verses that operate on pure hyperbole. We're not getting a lot of nuance here, or really much of any nuance here at all, and to be fair, it's not trying for that. Looking to cater directed to a preteen, teenage demographic that can appreciate the potent emotions that drive this sort of material. And while I can appreciate a little bit more nuance, I could argue that I can appreciate this album much in the same way that I love, say, Andrew WK. This is party music, pure and simple, and there's a certain power in that purity of experience. And as such, there's a limit to how much the lyrics really matter here. But to be fair to Charli XCX, she and her arsenal of songwriters do have a knack for this sort of material. I will admit to being a little bit disappointed that Ariel Pink doesn't contribute more off-kilter weirdness to his track London Queen, but the obvious Japan references are a sign of Rivers Cuomo's contribution to hanging around, even if that song does feel like Beverly Hills the girl version with more squealing grating effects. But for as much as the lyrics they don't matter here, there are a few moments that work pretty damn well. London Queen and Breaking Up have the teenage sensibility they need to work effectively, Boom Clap does a fairly good job capturing that thrill of a first love, and Body of My Own is the second song in 2 days about female masturbation that I've heard, and I have to say it sounds a lot more convincing coming from Charli XCX's faux punk delivery than coming from Beyonce. But by far the most interesting song lyrically, and easily the best song on this album, is Need Your Love, a song that actually demands Charli XCX display some subtlety as she sings about being head over heels in love even as the guy's being a total dick. And it helps that the retro girl group vocals on the chorus operate in such sharp contrast to the verses, where she sounds so weary and tired, almost sounding a little bit like Fox's on some of her slower jams, and at least some emotional complexity to a pretty straightforward record. Granted, not all the lyrics stick the landing. Break the Rules has one of the better melodies on this album, but the lyrics come across as painfully dated. I mean, come on, discotheque. And while this album is completely shallow, and I'm not holding it against that, keep that in mind. The song Gold Coins is such a thin and vapid fantasy of overblown wealth that I just can't get behind it at all. And there are some other nitpicks here. Take the song Doing It, a song that is basically saying, what I'm currently doing is awesome and fun, so let's keep doing that. I mean, that just seems a little bit pointless to me. And maybe it's just me, but the sloppy situation in Famous and the complete lack of irony and the glorification of that song, it's just not all that attractive to me whatsoever, especially with the cheap justification of just trying to be like someone famous. Keep in mind, famous people, not always good role models. But really, all this is dancing around the real issue that I have with this album, the instrumentation and the production. And really, this has been an issue that's been bothering me with Charli XCX since the very beginning, and that the majority of any of the melodies on her songs are going to be carried by her heavily multi-track vocals instead of within the guitars or the synth lines, which instead rely on a lot of overloaded banging percussion. I do like the attempts to bring in more guitarists, but when they aren't crushed into weedy and thin pieces at the very back of the mix or filtered through these flat-feeling walls of distortion, they're so heavily chopped up and have no real snarl to leave any real impact with me. It doesn't help matters that when we do get some melodies, they're buried beneath all manner of pop, squealing synth effects, whistles, cacophonous clusters of drumming, cheap vocal filters piled on to make Charli XCX's vocals more prominent and rough sounding in order to enhance that rock appeal, and overall contributing to this very dense, busy, overmixed sound that just does not stick with me whatsoever. Take Break the Rules, for example, which starts off with this tight, thicker bass line that I actually really like, but the second the beat and the EDM-inspired synths come in, that bass line feels pushed to the back with the texture of the strumming contributing more to the beat, not any specific melody. Or take all the glitchy attempts to add texture to the solid bass line on London Queen, but as soon as the percussion and the claps and the high chip tune come in, the melody feels completely marginalized. And while I give this album some credit for using a variety of percussion to fill up the entire mix, the same inherent problem remains that the songs that just don't stick with me in the same way without that catchy, gripping melodic hook. Instrumentally, they just start running together a little bit, with only songs like the synth-heavy Body of My Own, the more acoustic Die Tonight, and the retro-leaning Need Your Love, again, best song on the album. These are the only songs that really stood out to me, I'm sorry. So at the end of the day, Sucker by Charli XCX is definitely an improvement over True Romance, and a step towards a pop rock sound that I'd like to see catch fire on mainstream radio. And there's a certain charm to sticking with the very basics, like Andrew WK, for example. But unlike him, Charli XCX emphasizes heavy beats and some degree of groove over melody. And it seems like this album is a lot less catchy or sticky or interesting for me, especially when I don't get much beyond it in the lyrics, which means that it's getting a solid 6 from me. That said, if you got a taste for this sort of bratty pop rock, you're probably gonna really like Sucker. And while I don't love this record, I do like where it could be going from here. So you know what? Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm covering 2 more albums before the end of the year. Make sure to put in your suggestions on what you would like to hear, because one of them's already been decided, but the other one, just curious what you want me to cover. But beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.